So it's a new Overwatch season, and there's a lot of patch notes to navigate through, so if you don't know the best heroes to play this season, you've come to the right place. I've organised the list into 6 tiers, from heroes that you should completely avoid, to the meta heroes that are gonna be almost always picked. Starting off in F tier, with heroes you should completely avoid, I actually have no heroes, surprisingly. I think the devs have done a pretty solid job with this patch, and that balance in general hasn't been too bad to where you should completely avoid playing a hero. And keep in mind that I think the gaps between each tier, so from D tier to S tier, are actually quite small. With that being said, the one hero in the D tier, which means that I think this hero is weak but still one-trickable in my eyes, and that's Roadhog. Hog obviously had his one-shot nerfed, which is what made up a large part of his flanking playstyle. Now you need to rely more on your team to get value off hooks, as well as utilising cover to not feed your brains out. Its ultimate did get a small buff, but it's nothing drastic. I do see some Hog being played to counter Ball, who did receive a slurry of buffs, but that's about it. Now onto the C tier, with heroes who I'd classify as situationable or still playable, but just not as rewarding as the heroes above. Starting off, I of course have to talk about Mercy, who got nerfed pretty badly in this patch. Her HPS, or healing per second, was reduced by 10, but it's increased by 50% for those under half HP, which you could argue is a buff. She also has a new passive, which she heals for 25% of the healing done by her staff, which is just a shade over 10 HPS. But the real nerf was to her Guardian Angel. Some of her movement is 20% slower, but more importantly, the cooldown was increased by an entire second. That's an increase of 66%, and considering how reliant Mercy was on her movement to avoid and escape dive heroes, players now have an extra second to capitalise when Mercy GAs. I do think she still has a place in the game because of how powerful damage boost can be, but since Mercy's going to be pretty fragile now, I wouldn't be surprised if Brig took her place. Next up I have Mei. She received a buff to her ultimate to where it now costs 5% less. Mei's a bit of a hard placement because even though almost nobody plays her, she's actually not that bad. I do think her wall, especially for the average player, is hard to get value out of, and whilst her icicles don't have any fall off, you're not picking Mei for that reason. Not to mention that she gets outclassed pretty badly by her hit scan counterparts at medium range. With that being said, in situations where the map is short range, or you might need to brawl on points like on Colosseo or New Queen Street, that's where Mei shines. After Mei, I have Genji. Genji might be indirectly buffed now since it's easier to assassinate Mercy or Honor, but you can still certainly feel the clip and damage nerf he received a while back, and Brig is also now more powerful than ever. Genji's just kind of mediocre right now, but if you're good at him, you're still gonna win games. After Genji, I have Moira. Likewise to Mei, her ultimate now costs 5% less. Moira is always a weird one to talk about because the way low ranks, high ranks, and the pros play Moira are all completely different. Low ranks heal bots, but they're pretty inefficient with it. The Moiras in top 500 stick to a DPS playstyle, and the pros, funnily enough, go back to heal botting, but do it efficiently due to Moira's insanely high area of effect healing that the pros optimise around. With that being said, I do think Moira is a poor man's Kiriko in a lot of ways, and is a mechanically easier Kiriko at the lower ranks. If you want to climb quick at the lower ranks, she's still your go-to, but I don't see her being meta anytime soon. Next up I have Hanzo, who didn't receive any changes. The issue isn't with Hanzo necessarily, but that there's arguably better alternatives. His ultimate is a nice counter to Kitsune Rush, and his different arrows provide him useful scouting information as well as close range burst damage. By all means, still play him if you're good at him, but like most of the other heroes here, he's not the first pick I'm going to if I want to climb. Lastly, I have Pharah. Pharah's typically very reliant on Mercy, and with Mercy in the dumps at the moment, Pharmacy may be a bit harder to pull off, especially with the lack of consistent GAs or Guardian Angels. However, farmers who know how to play the hero can still find value with their dueling playstyle, she's just a tad bit more situational and map dependent now. Now entering the B tier, where I think these heroes are solid picks, and even if there are better heroes, they still hold their own. First off, I have Reinhardt. Ryan received some nice buffs this season, with his Fire Strike now doing 100 damage, his Shatter having a longer stun, and his Pin being on a 7-second cooldown. However, the center of his Shatter deals 80 less damage, and his Shatter costs 10% more. Whilst these are all nice buffs, and honestly you could even argue he's A tier, Ryan's lack of vertical mobility is what's holding him back. If you're getting pummeled by DPS on high ground on a map like Paraiso, these buffs won't really help you in that kind of situation. All he got this patch was a small turret nerf, where his turret now has 25 less HP. Torb's always been a strong pick below Masters, and this doesn't really change that. He's still certainly playable above that rank, you just need to make sure you hit your Cheetos, otherwise you might as well be playing a hit scan. Speaking of hit scan, Soldier's up next. He actually received a notable recoil buff, which I assume is targeted at lower skill players, so maybe Soldier goes up a tier if you're in the meta ranks. I do like this change though, since it helps to differentiate Soldier from Sojourn, where thanks to Sojourn's spread nerf a month ago, she's more suited to short to medium range, but the opposite is true here for Soldier. I do think Railgun is just superior to Helix though, but Soldier isn't by any means bad or weak right now. After Soldier, I have Sigma, who's only receiving a 7% ult cost increase this patch. Arguably, Sigma could just be a situational hero, since he fits a niche on being the best tank on maps like Circuit Royale and Junkertown, but kinda being mediocre elsewhere. But I still think even on maps where you don't see Sigma as much, he's still a solid pick. Also in the beta, I have Junker Queen, who received a small HP buff this patch. This likely isn't anything game changing for the Junker Queen, but just gives her an extra edge in brawl matchups when up close. Our commanding shout is still a solid tool when used aggressively in coordinated situations, and also a great get out of jail free card when used defensively. The Queen is certainly a bit slept on, I think. Next up I have Doomfist. I actually don't know why there's community sentiment in Doomfist being bad. Sure, he doesn't really have a great matchup against Orisa, but his surgical burst damage, as well as being much better than what he used to be before he got giga buffed, makes him a viable dive tank option. After Doom, I have Cassidy, who received a quality of life change to where he can roll through enemies, as well as receiving a small range buff. I've always compared Cassidy to Torb, in that Torb trades out consistent damage in favour for more sustain and bulk, and I still think that dichotomy is present here. Cassidy's flashbang is always going to be as annoying as ever, and he's still a reliable hit scan hero. After Cass, I have Symmetra. It's unfortunate that the majority of the player base just don't know how to play Symmetra flat out, so you'll have people chuck her at the bottom of their tier lists, yet nobody asks the question of, if Symmetra is so bad, why is she receiving a 10% ult nerf? Nobody's really caught on to how powerful Symmetra TPs and right clicks are, giving a comparable and even better range and mobility than half the DPS cast, while still having more sustain than them too. Next up is Widowmaker. This patch she received a notable HP nerf of 25, which means she can now be one-shot by Sojourn. While she'll still be able to thrive on long-range maps like Havana and Circuit Royale, there's perhaps more debate on her placement on other maps like King's Row, where other DPS and more broadly, closer range compositions can still work. There's perhaps more debate on where she stands on other maps like King's Row, where other DPS and more broadly, closer range comps can work. But as always, in the hands of a skilled player, Widowmaker will always be a threat. After Widow is Zarya, who received an ult increase by 8%. I think last patch Zarya was still underrated, especially with how much Orisa there was, but you definitely need to be careful with your bubbles now in order to maximise the value you gain with her. A high risk, high reward pick. The next hero up is Bastion. The buffs to his ultimate made it a lot more potent, but as we move into a more Bull Zen Brig meta, I think especially at the higher ranks, Bastion might be a bit too mobile and a bit too fragile compared to the rest of the hero cast, but he's certainly not as bad as people think. After, I have Orisa. Orisa received a significant nerf this patch regarding her damage fall off, which you can really feel beyond 15 meters, coupled with the Fortify nerf last patch, and she's basically where she was on release, but with a bit more HP. I do think that the player base has grown accustomed to a cyclical playstyle, and considering that I expect to see an increase of Bull and Diva, she does have good matchups into those heroes. If you're good on Orisa, things will be harder, but nail down your cycles and you'll still find value. Next up I have Junkrat, who received a damage nerf to his concussion mine to where he can still one-shot, but the consistency in pulling it off is going to be worse, because obviously his concussion mine damage decreases the further away you are from it. Best Junkrat mains out there are still going to land most of their one-shots, and his flanking playstyle is still viable, just that the risk and mechanics required to pull it off will be higher than before. After Junkrat, I have Ashe. A decent chunk of Ashe's potency did come from Mercy last season, who has been nerfed to a decent extent, but Ashe is still solid enough on her own. And since I think we're going into a Bull Tracer meta, and Ashe was featured in that in Overwatch 1, I don't see any reason as to why teams and players don't feature her in that comp in Overwatch 2. Next up I have Reaper, whose ultimate cost was reduced by 8%. There could be an argument for Reaper to be in the tier above, and I think he's in the top end of B tier in my opinion. I just think that Diva, who's pretty strong in this patch, plays pretty well into marking Reaper and ensuring his flanks don't get much value. The penultimate hero in this tier is Sombra. She received a damage buff this patch from 7 to 7.5, which makes her normal DPS go from 140 to 150, and her hack DPS go from 176 to just under 190. Sombra was in a really rough state and was probably the worst hero in the game last patch, with a sub 40% win rate. But thanks to changes to other heroes, and how much more Wrecking Ball I expect to see, Sombra's pick and win rate should increase. And lastly, to round off the B tier, I have Winston, who received a small nerf to his bubble HP. The issue with Winston is that he loses at every single tank matchup, but does really well at dealing with squishies in a safe, though telegraphed manner. Even when Orisa was busted last season, people were still playing him in Korean high ladder. Similar to Zarya and frankly the other tanks in this tier or below, you can still get value with them, just that there's a notable cost or risk associated with doing so. Now entering the A tier, I have Zen. All Zen had this patch was a clip increase of 5, but Zen's placement in this tier isn't really to do with Zen himself, but with Brig. Zen's biggest weakness has always been his glass cannon type nature. Now with Brig being buffed to the wazoo, Brig can make up for that weakness. I still think in ranked, if you're not playing Brig Zen, you might die more than other heroes, but at the highest levels of play, I do expect Zen to see a large chunk of play. Next up, and I'm going to bunch these 3 heroes together, I have Bap, Kiriko and Ana. The reason I've bunched these heroes together is that they're all great options in ranked environments, even if they're not meta. Bap's always been the jack of all trades hero, with sustain, damage, utility and healing. Kiriko is one of the most versatile heroes in the game regarding the playstyle she can adopt, and whilst Ana did receive a small biotic nade nerf, she's the only support with any CC and offers some of the strongest utility the game has to offer. You shouldn't really have an issue with any of these heroes in your team unless they're not really being played well. Next I want to talk about Wrecking Ball, who I'm pretty sure is going to be a staple in the ranked meta. Ball received a cooldown buff to his pile driver, a quarter of his HP is now shields, and although his minefield is now 9% more expensive, his mines are also more lethal with a 1 second arming time. In short, the reward for playing Ball has increased thanks to the lethality buff to the mines, whilst also the risk for playing Ball has decreased thanks to his shields. Ball is still a mechanically challenging hero to learn and master for most people, hence why he isn't at S tier, but once you do learn him, there's almost nothing stopping you. Your counters like Orisa and Hog have also been nerfed, so they should see less playtime too. Next, I have Echo. I like to think of Echo as a more self-sufficient Pharah because of her greater mobility at the cost of consistent AoE damage. Since I expect us to be entering a Brig Zen meta, Echo's always been a solid pick in that composition thanks to her range and mobility, so I do expect to see a little rise in Echo. Just after Echo I have Sojourn. As much as the Sojourn Mercy crisis took over Season 2, Sojourn's still a good hero with or without Mercy. Her burst mobility and burst damage still aren't to be messed with, and give Sojourn enough versatility in her playstyle to slide into a Brig Zen comp. Likewise to Echo, she has both range and mobility. The penultimate hero in this tier is Ramattra, whose ultimate now costs 12% more and doesn't have an infinite duration. The reason why Ramattra is still this high up is that I think he's the most versatile and therefore powerful Pokeball tank right now. Orisa's been nerfed, and I still think Ramattra wins over Reinhardt in most areas. Not to mention, Lucio Ramattra Ana is still a powerful combo to play around, even if we're entering a Brig Zen meta. Speaking of Lucio, he's the last hero to be added in this tier. Not only did he receive a nice ultimate cost reduction, but he's always been a great pick either when we're talking about ranked or team play. Reddit Lucios will still work as before, and any comp that wants to get up close or move to places quickly will greatly benefit from Lucio's unique speed boost. Now entering the S tier, I only have 3 heroes. 1 tank, 1 DPS and 1 support. Starting off with the latter, I have Brig. Brig received a flurry of buffs to where her repair pack instantly heals 25 HP on impact, though the healing over time has reduced from 110 to 100 over 2 seconds. Her rally ult cost is also being reduced by a hefty 10%. Not only does the burst damage help to fend off against heroes like Tracer or Genji, meaning you could double and triple pack your Zen and he's not gonna die, but considering the Mercy nerfs, there's much more of a reason to run Brig Ana or Brig Kiriko over Mercy Ana or Mercy Kiriko. There's also a Brig bug to where you can just one-shot Tracer by cancelling your bash animation with your whip shots, though this does reduce the distance you can travel with your bash. Brigitte Main should be looking forward to a place this season, I know I certainly am. Next, the DPS I've chosen is Tracer. Tracer has always occupied a unique role in the game because her mobility is close to uncontested. She was a staple in the Bull Tracer Brig Zen comp in Overwatch 1 because her ability to control any area of the map at almost any time is unparalleled, and considering her synergy with Brig and Zen, who I assume will see an uptick in pick rate, I also expect to see more Tracer. And lastly, to finish off this video, the tank I have at S tier is D.Va. This may seem a bit weird at first because D.Va didn't receive any role queue changes this patch, but more importantly, the other tanks at the top got nerfed. Ramattra and Orisa in particular, along with a Zarya nerf too. Considering D.Va is also the most versatile tank in the game, thanks to her ability to either dive or peel, I really think you should be getting on the D.Va train right now and learn how to play this hero, which you can do by watching my D.Va guides. Well, that's it for the video. I know tier lists can be a bit contentious, and I could definitely see some heroes being moved up or down a notch, so let me know your thoughts down below. Until next time.